What he transmitted was the simple, noble sound of Spain, and that united people. He was constantly trying to get closer to what he felt the true sound of the Spanish guitar was. Welcome to The Tonic, a tone-based classical guitar podcast that explores the fascinating detail of the guitar world. We'll explore the history on which our musical universe is built, the science that's driving it forward, and the people, the pieces, and everything in between that make now the best time ever to be a guitarist. I'm your host, Rosie Bennett, and today we'll be exploring the life and work of Francisco Tárrega. Who was he? How did he write his music? Who were his inspirations? Why are his works still so popular over 100 years later? And to what extent has his music become paradigmatic of the sound of the Spanish classical guitar? To get a more complete picture of all of these questions, we need to go way back to recreate the circumstances under which he came to be. Each person has a mythology, a life world in which they're born and through the spectacles of which they see the world around them. The 1800s in Spain were a tumultuous time. The turn of the century had them both at war with and then allied against the English with post-revolutionary France, which, for Catalonia and its surrounding regions, had meant occupation by the French military, followed by complete blockades on all of its major ports. The result was widespread unemployment, murderous riots, and merciless poverty. At the same time, the yo-yoing between support and oppression that the Catalonian region was subject to made it increasingly politically unstable. The brotherhood and trust that came with the peace and prosperity of the 1700s was quickly lost during the next 75 years, in which the Peninsular War and subsequent occupation by Napoleon, a destructive liberation war, 2 civil wars, the loss of the bulk of its colonies, military coups, the instating of a foreign monarchy, and a failed republic tore Spain pretty much apart. For the average person in Spain at this time, life was completely unpredictable, and even more so for the Catalonian and Valencian regions, which became the battleground for the civil wars, the first 2 of which spanned for over a decade. Families that were once rich had been thrown into cruel poverty, and people lived in a constant state of unrest and anxiety. Emilio Pujol, in his colourful biography of Tárrega's life, describes the flat lands that would be Tárrega's birthplace as a tapestry of red earth steeped in heroes' blood and legend. And so, it was against this backdrop of political turmoil and bloody battle that, in a small, sleepy white house beside the convent of St. Pascal in Villarreal at 4 a.m. on November 21st, 1852, Francisco Tárrega was born. Exemplary of the time, he was raised by the honour and love of his parents, the rigid framework of school and the church, and his formative experiences were those of friendship, fight, and play in the streets. The famous and lifelong impairment to his sight, which he had sustained after almost drowning in the filthy water of the Mijares River as a baby, didn't affect his childhood much. Certainly not in his ability to form close friendships and get up to wonderful mischief. Perhaps the only real repercussion was an earlier than usual introduction to music, which Tárrega's father, who himself had become blind aged only 35, believed would be the key to his survival should his sight become any worse.
Tárrega started playing the guitar in the age of 8 years, and at the same time he studied piano. So we have the classical situation that we both have a guitar player and we have a piano player. This is quite interesting because his family was very poor. He grew up in Villarreal, which is close to Benicàssim, to Castellón, so in the Valencian area. The family was pretty poor, and very often he had to raise some money for the family to support the family. And he raised that money playing piano in clubs. It was not his guitar playing, at least not in this early stage. Later, Tárrega studied music in Madrid, the capital, and at that time it was impossible to study classical guitar. This was the instrument of the street. There was something for flamenco, for popular music, but not for classical music.
To say that Tárrega supported the family financially at this age would be running a little too loosely with the truth. It is probable that Tárrega played some role in the family's financial situation, mostly at this age at the rope makers, spinning hemp and twisting rope, which was one of the biggest industries in the area at the time. But that help was mostly symbolic. In its hurry to romanticize a figure, history often too easily forgets the valuable roles that other characters may have played in a story. In this case, Tárrega's father, Francisco Tárrega Tirado. It shouldn't be forgotten that upon realizing that Tárrega had an aptitude for music, it was his father who picked up extra night work in the town to afford his solfège and piano studies, and his father who subsequently gathered together the money to allow Tárrega to move to Barcelona and pursue his playing career under the tutelage of Julián Arcas. Through the love for his son, he traded everything he had, and a little bit more, so that Tárrega could succeed. It was, as Wolfgang Liska mentions in his tone-based lesson on the spirit of Tárrega, the move from Barcelona to Madrid to study that really defined much of Tárrega's life, and that gave the identity to the compositional style that we so associate with him today. It's unclear exactly how many works Tárrega composed during his lifetime. Different sources cite anywhere between 80 and 120 own compositions, and the number of arrangements and transcriptions he made is estimated at between 200 and 300 works. It would be a little too simplistic to say, as it often is said, that Tárrega transcribed so much because of his frustration with the works that were already written for the guitar. In reality, it was more a product of the times, a labour of love and a party trick. You see, in the mid-1800s, it wasn't only the classical guitar that suffered a lack of innovation and freedom. The aggression and militant sentiment that defined the 1700s and early 1800s had sort of defined the artistic soul of the previous 4 generations, and that had created a void of popular music in favour of patriotic melodies and military marches. The richness of the Spanish classical music scene had somewhat stagnated. The Royal Conservatory of Music was established in Madrid in 1830 and the Liceo in Barcelona in 1838, and this marked the start of the recovery of the national feeling in Spanish music. Slowly, organised music making began to take place again just for the sake of music itself. Musical societies started forming, first in private, to marvel at the work of composers like Mozart, Beethoven and Haydn that had been covered in the dust of Spanish Revolution for so long, and soon also for the general public, and in much larger and more accessible concert locations. The symphonic organisations paved the way for the quartet clubs and those to wider chamber music gatherings, and then the legendary concert societies, and in particular the Society of Classical Concerts, which changed the course of history in music in Spain forever. Through an initial desire to just come together and play for each other and discover the music of the classical legends, these societies of musicians accidentally created a concert circuit for performers, and along with it created a huge hungry public who were willing to travel to and pay for performances. In fact, so strong was the public's will to see musical performance, and so many in number were the blossoming musicians, that cafes across the nation began hiring classical performers to entertain their patrons with popular tunes during peak hours, competing for the best musicians. This meant that in the 1880s and 90s you could go out for dinner and find yourself being serenaded by Isaac Albéniz and then go and have a drink while being entertained by Pablo Casals on the cello. And so it was in this musical world that Tárrega began playing concerts, first among friends, then for his gathering followers, and eventually for small public gatherings. And in them he played the popular pieces of the time, whether they were written for orchestra, piano, cello, or string quartet. Over time, his repertoire became refined and enriched with works that delighted the public and that matched his desire to push the boundaries of what the instrument could do. Often, he would include soaring renditions of popular works of the time. His concerts went from charming groups of familiar fans to playing for larger audiences and touring, playing every night, sometimes playing twice in a night, once for his paying public, and then afterwards in a more intimate setting for the group of musicians who flocked around him. His work immeasurably increased the popularity of the guitar, and despite him marrying and starting a family at the beginning of the 1880s, his career continued to flourish with concert tours across Europe and, of course, his beloved Spain. In 1885, after the death of his infant daughter, Tárrega and his family settled down in Barcelona, and he began limiting his concert tours to Spain alone. During one such concert in Valencia, he happened to meet Doña Concha Martínez, a wealthy art lover from the region who had known much personal suffering and who had fallen in love with the guitar, even pursuing guitar lessons, although unsuccessfully, for years. After this chance meeting, she invited Tárrega into her inner circle, which was made up of intellectuals and artists from the region. They would gather for dinners, during which Tárrega was enchanted by the conversation, and after which he would enchant the guests with his guitar. Doña Concha would make life more financially stable for Tárrega, and in doing so allow him to withdraw from his constant public attention to grieve the death of his daughter, and also to spend more time with his family. It also allowed him the freedom to spend more time experimenting with composing. Notably, during this quieter period of his artistic life, Tárrega wrote Danza Mora after visiting Algeria and Recuerdos de la Alhambra after visiting the Alhambra Palace in Granada, all with and thanks to Doña Concha. It was also during this period, at the turn of the century, that Tárrega began experimenting with playing with the flesh instead of with the nail. Pujol writes, Tárrega's sensitive ears had adapted to the sound of the orchestra, the string quartet, and the cushioned hammer of the piano. His forays into the great name of art were to give him nuances of expression which were not found due to his personal aesthetic in an uneven, metallic, sharp timbre. His dream was to capture the light homogeneity of the string quartet. On many occasions, the accidental loss of a nail had let him hear the mellowness obtained without the nail plucking the string. He knew well that Saw, a contemporary of Haydn, Mozart and Beethoven, as classical as they were, had forbidden the use of the nail in strumming. However, neither Saw nor anyone else had found a means of avoiding it. Tárrega therefore began lessening the surface of the nail on his right hand. Step by step, he was eliminating the nail completely. The process required a completely new way of plucking and a hardened fingertip, which he began working at immediately in private, until the June of 1902, when he reappeared on the concert stage in Barcelona with a new technique and an overhauled repertoire that would only drive his popularity further. It was through this new technique and the popularity that Tárrega had amassed that he began to give classes to young guitarists, Miguel Llobet, Daniel Fortea, and Emilio Pujol, that we now call the Tárrega School. His influence was growing, and alongside it his sensitivity, which musicians of the time loved and praised him for. On November the 19th, 1904, the newspaper La Vanguardia wrote, "In order to understand what Tárrega does with the guitar and feel in union with his inspiration, one must hear him." We couldn't imagine what a guitar was. We had no idea of what that six-stringed instrument could make you feel. When Tárrega is playing, the guitar is something more than an instrument. It's a living being that vibrates in time to music. In 1906, while practicing at his home, Tárrega suffered a stroke, which would leave him bedridden and unable to play guitar for most of the rest of his life. Never fully resigned to his fate, he continued transcribing melodies and writing out compositions on paper, pressing his fingers each day to the strings of his guitar and working at regaining control of his body piece by piece. He would never play in public again, but he did still play for friends, who all gathered together to offer to pay him for his bi-monthly mini-concerts, as much money as he needed to keep his affairs in order. These concerts were attended by, aside from his intellectual, artistic friends, poor vagrant locals and street musicians. His music created a synthesis between two sharply distinct sections of society, and all were equally welcome. 1909 brought with it homesickness for Tárrega, so in January he and his wife relocated to his hometown Castellón, eventually settling in Valencia. During this time, a revolution erupted in Barcelona, the Tragic Week. Churches and convents were burned, and among them the Sacred Heart, whose cloister adjoined Tárrega's roof. The memories the family had made in that home would be burned, almost as if foreshadowing what was to come. The family did return to Barcelona, but Tárrega would only live for a few more months. 15 days before his death, he wrote Oremus, his transcription of Schumann's Fantasietanz, opus 124, number 5. The original is fast, scales running over each other as if in chase. Tárrega's version is slower, more resigned, perhaps more reflective of his mental state. From his account of December 14th to 15th, 1909, Pujol writes, "The anguish on his face reflected his uneasy foreboding, and his frenzied imagination dashed restlessly through realms of fantasy. Hours later, illumined by resigned happiness, he finally gave in without defeat in the struggle he had sustained throughout his life, and he prayed for God's mercy on his soul." And so at 5 o'clock, almost the same time he had come into the world, under the cover of the cool, dark, early hours of a new winter's day, Francisco Tárrega slipped away peacefully, with those who loved him at his bedside. So, what was the Tárrega sound that made him so loved? When we try to imagine Tárrega's sound world, there are 5 things that come to mind. Where he was playing, who he was playing for, what he was playing on, and how he was playing. The Tárrega sound world comes alive when we recreate how he would have been preparing his concerts, where those concerts would have been, and who they would have been for. Despite the fact that at the height of his fame, Tárrega was playing in large concert halls such as the Grand Teatro in Valencia, the Salle Pleyel in Paris, or even the Opera in Lyon, personal written accounts from his loyal followers and his own diaries tell us the story we expect and in some way hope for, that most of his concerts were small, intimate salon get-togethers, dinners, or chance cabaret performances, where he would add improvised accompaniments to fellow musicians playing popular tunes, and that he would often be mesmerizing audiences until the early hours of the morning.
The audience was usually between 20 and 50 people, not more than that, not a huge concert halls. And guitar and its own sonority and dynamics, I think, fit ideally in this space and for this amount of people. I could never imagine guitar, in a huge hall with 2,000 people. I do it, we all do it. There's amplification and, louder guitars, carbon strings, everything's getting louder and bumpier. But if you go back to Torres' guitar, which is the guitar Tárrega used, this is somehow maybe the foundation of our sound, and Capricho Árabe, its best representative.
As Zoran Dukic says in this tone-based lesson on Capricho Árabe, Tárrega's vibrant, organic writing is part of what makes his music so lovable. We know that he spent a great deal of time reworking his pieces and attending concerts. The result is that he would rarely play a piece the same twice. He was a fantastic improviser, and he enjoyed making audiences laugh and gasp. In accounts by Pujol and Jobbet, both recount the audible and visible energy that his audiences produced in response to his musical jokes and virtuosic displays. The harmonic sketches that Tárrega eventually set down on paper for his pieces are a catalogue of memories of hundreds of performances of these melodies, experimented with and played with and interacted with by each audience. His audiences were made up of intellectuals to aesthetes, land workers to the homeless. There doesn't really seem to be a section of society that liked him or accepted him most. It seems that his music touched a great deal of people from all walks of life. What he transmitted was the simple, noble sound of Spain, and that united people. He was constantly trying to get closer to what he felt the true sound of the Spanish guitar was. Here we can listen to Wolfin Lieske explain how Tárrega adapted his technique to produce the sound colour he wanted.
It is said that he developed the apoyando. He was not the first. It's probably Fernando Sor and also Dionisio Aguado who used the rest stroke, especially if they had to emphasize a note, to give an accent on it. They didn't use it so much as a sound culture, something which is aesthetic in its own. For Tárrega, it was the sound of the late 19th century in Spain. It's a romantic concept of sound, of guitar sound. There are some drawings in his school where you can see the fingers are in one line. The fingertips are in one line, rectangular with the strings. And we come to this sound. So the string is vibrating freely, and the Tárrega concept puts it into the piano playing. So you have the fingers here, here are the keys. So you could imagine you have the guitar here like this, and you play like this. Like the electric guitar players today, who play with both hands on the fingerboard. Okay, so his attack is rectangular to the string, and he uses the rest stroke. Instead of
if we begin to talk about sound and what that would have meant to Tárrega, we can't do so without talking about Antonio de Torres. Having started out as a carpenter, as many luthiers do, it's generally accepted that Torres began building guitars in the 1840s, when he was in his 20s. But he only became serious about it as a profession in his 30s, after Julián Arcas became interested in his instruments and urged him to take it up professionally. The collaboration between Arcas and Torres would be lifelong and would lead to Torres becoming the most influential guitar maker in history. To increase the volume of a guitar, Torres built the body larger than what had previously been traditional, and he began making lighter, thinner soundboards. It was his conviction that the soundboard above all else defined the quality of a guitar. José Romaníos, acclaimed luthier and guitar historian, says about him, "His greatest merit is that he came up with a universally accepted guitar. The bridge he used was nothing new. Aguado had already invented it. Similarly, fan bracing had already been invented, and arched tops and backs were nothing new. But as it so often is with great inventions, like the first aircraft, for example, it's a case of one person bringing together a series of existing elements and successfully getting them to work together as a whole." Julián Arcas was the most popular touring guitarist of the time, and it wasn't long before friends and fans of Tárrega were urging him to acquire an instrument of the same quality and sonority. One such fan was Antonio Canessa Mendañas, a rich businessman who had made his fortune in the orange export industry. He decided to offer Tárrega his generous and unconditional patronage. And so, in the autumn of 1869, the two men travelled to Seville, the Andalusian capital, and visited the famous workshop of Torres. In fact, Tárrega would play on 3 Torres instruments in his life, the first of which, the FE-17, which is currently in Jonathan Kellerman, the American mystery novel writer's collection, was made in 1864 and can be heard played here by tone bass artist Pepe Romero.
Our sense of touch, where does it go? It goes to where the sound is actually being produced, which is the cavity of the guitar, is the air that is inside. A guitar is really not this, it's what's inside of this. Is the air that is there, that is a universe unto itself, to be experienced.
Tárrega played this instrument up until 1889, when the guitar underwent necessary repair and came out a little worse for wear. He lovingly retired the instrument and turned to a new Torres guitar, the SE-49, which had been built in 1883 and was part of what luthiers and historians today call Torres' second epoch. Like his previous guitar, SE-49 was built with flamed maple for the sides and 4-piece back, and is decorated with some of the same inlay materials in the rosette. Here, tone bass artist Bill Canengeiser plays the SE-49. Of this guitar, José Romaníos writes, "There are several marks where the wood has been burned, probably the result of cinders falling from the cigarettes Tárrega smoked while he was playing. SE-49 bears these marks, undoubtedly resulting both from the artist's complete absorption into whatever piece he was playing, and from the poor quality of the tobacco and the coarseness of the paper. Not only the protective coating of varnish was burned, but also the very wood. The cigarette tended to burn unevenly, catching alight in some parts and not in others, causing particles of smouldering tobacco to fall onto the upper rib of the guitar. In one photograph published in Pujol's book, Tárrega can be seen in the middle of a rendition of some musical passage, and, hanging from his lips, half hidden under his beard, is an unevenly burnt cigarette. A compulsive smoker, Tárrega was never without a cigarette, be it during his private recitals or during his public concerts. The music critic for the magazine Ilustración Española y Americana remarked that not only could Tárrega perform passages with only the left hand, but he also allowed himself the pleasure of smoking while doing it. The third Torres Tárrega owned was the SE-114, which was built in 1888, and which Tárrega famously loved and thought was the best of his instruments. Little is to be found about how the guitar came into Tárrega's hands. He is, however, seen in portrait with this instrument. with, of course, a cigarette hanging from his mouth. This guitar currently belongs to the famous collection of Sheldon Ehrlich, but here is a recording of tone bass artist René Izquierdo playing it. For the last 100 years, these guitars have become part of stellar collections, passing from hand to hand as people chase the dream of holding and playing a guitar that Tárrega himself held, played and loved. Provenance becomes increasingly important to us with each year that passes between our current life and the historical event we dream of. It's no wonder why Wolfgang Liska wants his guitar to have been played by Tárrega, and it's no wonder why people in the comments and in forums challenge it. We desperately want the relics of our past to be objects that have truly been touched by the hands of our heroes. We want to bring them and their experiences near to us. Would we be so desperate to place our hands on the relic of a composer or a musician whose story touched us less? Maybe. Plenty of people barely even know Tárrega's story beyond that lies in the music. And surely we know that it's not in the instrument, but in the player of the instrument that the music lies. Perhaps it's just knowing or feeling the love and pain and wonder he felt that we entwine into the material of his music, that we play to get as close to him as possible. Maybe he saw things so clearly and expressed the images before him so colourfully that we really feel that we can see what was before him when we play Recuerdos de la Alhambra. Like a nuclear shadow, maybe the events or emotions about which his works were written have left their traces in the works themselves, that we can only access through listening to them or playing them. Perhaps that's what makes the experience of playing his music or playing his guitar such a moving one. The chance to be a part of the inspiration through which his pieces moved and came to life. Maybe it's this that unites us in loving his music so consistently. It seems to me that the strength of Tárrega's influence these days lies in the strength of influence that he had during his lifetime. The music Tárrega was writing and then bringing to stages locally and across Europe was putting a spotlight on and breathing wonder and colour and life back into the melodies that the people in his region had grown up with. After such a long and recent history of so much turmoil and bloodshed in Spain, these melodies woven into rich, exciting tapestry on their beloved guitar were stirring people and uniting them, not only as an audience to his artistry and his craft, but also in the spacious freedom of peace and the exciting feeling that that instrument lying in the corner of each household held not only the roots of Spain's folkloric past, but the innovations of its future.